When Duncan was King of Scotland, one of his family, Macbeth, was highly thought of at court because of his great courage in war. As Macbeth and another general, called Banquo, were returning from a war, they stopped when three strange figures appeared. The figures looked like women, except that they had beards. With their lined skin and strange clothes, they did not look like any other creature seen on earth. When Macbeth spoke to them, they each put a finger to their thin lips, as if they wanted to silence him. Then suddenly, each of them spoke. "Which one? When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? Which two? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won? Which three? That will be ere the set of sun. Which one? Where the place? Which two? Upon the earth. Which three? There to meet with Macbeth. Which one? I come, Grey Malkin. Which two? Paddock calls. Which three? Anon." And then all the three witches said, "Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and fill the air." Shakespeare began his play with this musical chant by the three witches. They agreed to meet Macbeth when he returns from war. At this meeting, they tell Macbeth that one day he will be King of Scotland. "Greetings, Lord of Glamis," the first said. "Greetings, Lord of Cawdor," the said second. "Greetings, O future king," cried the third. Macbeth was astonished that these strange figures knew him. He was even more astonished by their prophecy. "The Lord of Cawdor is still alive," he cried, "and I shall never be the king while King Duncan's son's alive." Now the creatures turned to Banquo and said these strange words. "You, Banquo, are less great than Macbeth, and greater. You, Banquo, are less happy than Macbeth, and happier. You, Banquo, shall never be king, but your sons shall be the kings in Scotland." As they spoke, they turned in the air and disappeared. The generals then knew that they had been speaking with witches. As they stood thinking about their prophecy, messengers from the king arrived to speak to Macbeth. "Duncan, the King of Scotland, has made you Lord of Cawdor," they told him. Macbeth was so astonished that at first he could not speak. "Perhaps the third witch will also be right," he thought, "and one day I shall be Scotland's king." He turned to Banquo. "Since the witch's prophecy for me has come true, do you also hope that your sons shall be kings of Scotland?" he asked. "Their words have made you hopeful," Banquo replied. "But sometimes witches tell us the truth in little things, to lead us into evil." But Macbeth had begun to believe the witch's prophecy, and he ignored Banquo's warnings. From that moment on, he only thought about one thing. How could he become the King of Scotland? Macbeth's wife was an evil woman who wanted only to be great and powerful. She did not care how she achieved this. As soon as she heard the witch's prophecy, she began to talk of killing the king so that it could come true. But Macbeth was upset by her words. It happened at this time that Duncan and his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, visited Macbeth to honor him for his great success in the wars. Macbeth's castle was very pleasant. The air around it was sweet-smelling and full of birds. The king was pleased by everything he saw, and by Lady Macbeth's great kindness towards him and his servants. He gave her a beautiful jewel to thank her. Lady Macbeth smiled and looked like an innocent flower, but all the time She was the snake under it. The king was tired after his long journey, and he went to bed early. In the middle of the night, when nature seems dead over half the world, when bad dreams trouble men's minds, when only the murderer and the wild animal are awake, Lady Macbeth began to plot the death of the king. But she was afraid that her husband could not do it. She knew that he wanted to be a great man, but she also knew that he was not ready to carry out the sort of crime that often goes with such a desire. She forced her husband to agree to the murder, but at the same time, she was afraid that Macbeth's kindness would prevent it. So, carrying a knife, Lady Macbeth went to the king's room. There she found his servants deeply asleep after all the wine she had given them during the evening. Lady Macbeth looked at the sleeping Duncan for a while, but she did not have the courage to kill him, because he looked too much like her own father. She returned to talk to her husband, who was beginning to change his mind. There were strong reasons why he was against the murder. "Not only am I a loyal citizen of the king," he said, "but he is also a relative. He has been my guest today. I must keep my guests safe from murderers, not kill them. Duncan is a fair and kind king to all his people, especially me. He has never offended any of his citizens. If he dies, they will want to take their revenge. It is thanks to him that everybody honors me. I do not want my good name to be taken away. I do not want to be called a murderer." But Lady Macbeth was not persuaded to stop her evil plan. She gave her husband reason after reason why he should carry out the murder. "You must not be afraid," she said. "It will be so easy to kill him. The action of just one short night will make us king and queen." Still Macbeth would not agree. "You are weak and afraid," she shouted at him. "I know what it is like to have a baby feed at my breast, but I would kill that baby if you made me to do it to keep a promise. You promised to kill the king, and now you have broken that promise. Nobody will know. We shall lay the guilt of the murder upon the servants who sleep by his bed. I gave them much wine to drink tonight." Hearing these words, Macbeth picked up the knife and went into the darkness, towards the room where Duncan lay. As he walked, he thought he saw another knife before him, covered with blood. But when he tried to get hold of it, there was nothing but air. It was a ghost knife, which came from the fear of the crime he was about to carry out. Getting rid of his fear, Macbeth entered the king's room and killed him. As he finished the murder, one of the servants laughed in his sleep, and the other cried, "Murder!" Macbeth thought he heard a voice crying, "Sleep no more." Macbeth has murdered sleep. Glamis has murdered sleep. Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. Imagining these terrible things, Macbeth returned to his wife. At first, she thought that he had not murdered the king. He was so upset that again she called him weak and afraid. "Go and wash the blood from your hands," she ordered him, "while I go back with this knife to put blood on the faces of the king's servants." Morning came, and with it the discovery of the murder. Although Macbeth and his lady appeared full of sorrow, and the servants were covered with blood, many people thought that Macbeth was guilty. He had more to gain from the murder than the poor servants did. Duncan's sons escaped from the castle. Malcolm, the elder, went to England, and the younger, Donalbain, went to Ireland. As the king's heirs had run away, the next year Macbeth became king of Scotland, and so the prophecy of the three witches had come true. Although Macbeth was now king, He and his queen could not forget the rest of the prophecy, that Banquo's children, and not their own, would be the next kings. They had carried out a terrible crime, yet their old children would never rule Scotland. They decided to kill Banquo and his son. The king and queen prepared a great feast, to which they invited all the great lords. Macbeth sent murderers to kill Banquo as he and his son made their way to the castle that night. Banquo died, but Fleance escaped in the fight. During the feast, the king and queen were so pleasant and kind that everybody thought well of them. Macbeth talked freely to his guests, saying that everything honorable was under his roof that night, except for his good friend Banquo. "How I shall complain to him about his late arrival when he comes to my feast," Macbeth said. As he spoke these words, the ghost of Banquo entered the room and sat down on the king's chair. Although Macbeth was a brave man in war, his face turned white with fear at this sight. He stood looking at the ghost, but the queen and nobles could only see an empty chair. "It is just in your mind," the queen said softly in her husband's ear, "like that knife you saw in the air when you went to kill Duncan." But Macbeth could still see the ghost, and he ignored his wife's words. He began to speak to it, fearing that the others would hear their terrible secret. Lady Macbeth sent all the guests away, saying that the king was ill. From then on, the king and queen had terrible dreams. Fleance's escape troubled them more than Banquo's death. They found no peace, and so Macbeth decided to look for the three witches and find out more about his future. He found them in a cave, sitting around a large pot of boiling water. They knew he was coming, and they were preparing spells. Into the pot they were putting bats and snakes, the tongue of a dog, the finger of a dead child, and many poisonous plants. When the water became too hot, they poured in the blood of a monkey to make it colder. In this way, they made the spirits of the dead speak to them. "Do you wish us, or our masters, the spirits of the dead, to tell your future?" they asked Macbeth. "Where are your spirits?" Macbeth asked bravely. "Let me see them." 3 spirits came into the cave. The first was in the shape of a head. "Macbeth, Macbeth," it called, "be careful of Macbeth, the Lord of Fife." "Thank you," Macbeth replied. The second spirit appeared in the shape of a child covered in blood. "Macbeth, Macbeth," it called, "do not be afraid. No man born of a woman shall have the power to hurt you. Be brave." "Then I need not to fear Macbeth?" Macbeth replied. The third spirit came in the shape of a child king, holding a tree in his hand. "Macbeth, Macbeth," it called, "you will be the king until Burnham Wood moves to Dunstan Hill." "Good, good," Macbeth cried. "Nobody can move a wood. I'm safe. My life will not be shortened by a violent death. But my heart needs to know one more thing. Will Banquo's sons ever be the kings of Scotland?" As Macbeth spoke, the boiling pot disappeared into the ground. Music was heard, and 8 shadows, like kings, passed by Macbeth. Banquo, covered with blood, was the last one. He was carrying a glass which showed the shapes of many more kings. Banquo smiled and pointed to them. In this way, Macbeth knew that Banquo's heir would rule after him. The 3 witches disappeared, and from this time, Macbeth's thoughts became more terrible. As soon as he returned to his castle, Macbeth heard that Macduff, the Lord of Fife, had gone to England to join Malcolm, Duncan's elder son. They planned to fight Macbeth and put the true king back on the throne. Macbeth was so angry that he sent men to Macduff's castle to kill his wife and children. Then he set about killing anyone who called himself a friend of Macduff. His lords began to hate him because of the evil actions. Those who were able to escape to join Markham and Macduff, who were approaching with a powerful army. "I want to die," Macbeth said to himself. "Then I could sleep well in my grave like Duncan." The Queen was the only person who knew Macbeth's evil secret. She was the only one he could talk to about his dreams. But, unable to bear the guilt of the crime any longer, she went mad and killed herself. Macbeth was alone with no one to love or care for him. He had no friend to whom he could tell his evil secret. Hated by everyone, Macbeth wished to die even more. The news that Malcolm's army was near brought back some of his old courage. He wanted to die with a sword in his hand. The witch's prophecy had filled him with false confidence. He remembered that no man born of a woman could hurt him, and that he would be king until Burnham Wood came to Dunsinane Hill. Macbeth shut himself up in his castle and waited for the army to arrive. One day, a messenger came to him, pale and trembling. "I can hardly tell you what I've seen, sir," he said. "As I watched from the hill, I looked towards Burnham Wood. I think it began to move." "If you lie, you shall die hanging from a tree," Macbeth shouted. "And if you speak the truth, I do not care. If it is true that the wood moves, then let me face my enemy," he said to himself. "I'm tired. I want to die." With these words, he and his men left the castle to fight. Malcolm was a wise general. As his army marched through Burnham Wood, he told his men to disguise themselves as trees. When Macbeth looked down over Burnham Wood, it moved. The prophecy of the spirit. "Oh my God," he said. The prophecy of the spirit had come true in an unexpected way. When Macbeth understood this, some of his courage disappeared. The two armies faced each other, and a fierce battle began. Macbeth's men did not serve him well, but the king fought so hard that he soon faced Macduff. As they battled, Macduff reminded Macbeth that he had killed his wife and children. Macbeth wanted to turn away, but Macduff called him a murderer. Then Macbeth remembered the spirit's words, "No man born of a woman shall have the power to hurt you." Macbeth smiled with confidence as he fought. "A man that is born of a woman cannot kill me," he shouted. "The spirit lies," Macduff shouted. "I was not born from a woman. I was taken from my mother's body early, before it was time for me to born." As he heard Macduff's words, Macbeth felt the last of his courage disappear. "A man must never believe the words of witches," he shouted. "They deceive us with words. They give them different meanings and destroy our hopes. I shall not fight you, Macduff." "Then live," Macduff shouted. "We shall show you to the people as we show monsters. We shall write a sign saying, 'Here men may see the cruel king.'" "Never," Macbeth replied, his courage as strong as his sorrow at being alive. "I shall not live to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet to be laughed at by men. Although Burnham Wood has come to Dunsinane Hill, and you were not born of a woman, I shall fight you." With these words he threw himself at Macduff, and they fought hard until Macduff cut off the king's head. He gave it as a gift to the true king, Malcolm. In this way, Malcolm, the son of Duncan, took back his land and became king of Scotland.